I became a Christian at age 10 and found that Jesus Christ was real, that the Bible was the Word of God, could be trusted. And then as I continued the studies in school, I was introduced to a concept of long ages, explaining the early introduction of Genesis. And that was a compromised concept, but it was at least introduced in the mind, in the background. I accepted the immediate Genesis account, the gospel account, but at the same time, there was a question. And then as I pursued studies and science classes, took all the science I could at every opportunity. I was introduced, of course, to dinosaurs and long ages, geologic expansion of time. So reflected back on the possibility that there could be a gap or an extension of time in the Genesis record. And unfortunately, when I was then taught evolution in the public school system, there was a fertile, receptive field. And I bought the lie of evolution because I was taught that there was evidence supporting the descent of man. So this created an incredible controversy in my own heart and mind. And it was that if Jesus accepted the Genesis account, and he did, and if the Genesis account was not accurate, if there was a God, essentially he had lied to me or deceived me at best. And that created an incredible conflict within. Outwardly, I never mentioned it, but for long years, that controversy was there. So, over a period of time, being a believer, knowing that there was a God, I still went through a time, even as a believing Christian, a time of atheistic thought. Because if God had lied to me, I couldn't trust him. He wasn't the God of the Bible. So he could not be the genuine God of creation. So I realized then, in those mid-teenage years, when I was taking as much advanced study in every direction as I could, it wasn't enough just to get the classes at school. I studied Latin and other things on the side, and everything I could. But the dichotomy was there, it was introduced, and I realized, and now looking back upon it, I recognized that this was the hand of God taking me through a scenario to hopefully benefit someone else along the way. If I, as a born-again Christian believer, could be so deceived that I could even question the existence of God, the God who had sent his Son to die for me, then I was really no exception. Others could. That gives me empathy for the individual in the classroom, sitting in the pew, driving down the street, watching television, because even born-again Christians are susceptible to that deceit and lie. So, if I couldn't trust the God of the Bible, I, for a period of time, in my own heart and mind privately, thought atheistic thoughts because of that question of evolution. I was taught there was evidence supporting evolution. And that had been introduced actually by the wife of a dear pastor speaking for 5 minutes in the youth group, saying that in seminary they learned that actually you can explain the Genesis account with long ages. All of that fit together. Finally, I got peace over the matter of, is there a God, and is he the God of creation and the God of the Bible? Didn't have all the answers, but I got peace. And I remember driving late one night through Kansas, looking at the stars. And I was just overwhelmed with the fact that it took God to create those stars. And so I later sat down and wrote a little poem. But the poem came as I was driving. It's an iambic pentameter in the Elizabethan sonnet meter. And the little poem went like this. Should the rose lose all its beauty and crumble in mere decay, should the stream neglect its duty and in motionless silence lay, if the stars should lose their luster and fall from the skies above, if sin should become man's master, and on earth there be found no love, should by reason no God bear existence, and through searching no goodness be found, should man shun deity acceptance, and the heavens all echo the sound, still would dwell in my soul the certainty that God lives and will for eternity. The point is, no matter what trauma, what scenario we go through, we are not faithful to the logic, the reason, and the evidence, but God is. Christ is the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. And in due course, he will show every man, every individual of age, that he's genuine and that there's evidence to be found. So, in the pursuit of that evidence, I went through the scenario first of trying to adopt outright atheism. Well, why didn't I adopt outright atheism? I had been fed enough outside extracurricular information to convince me evolution was true. And in the course of study in the classroom, it was presented as factual evidence. Why then did I not adopt atheism? Because at the same time that my mind said atheistic evolution is true, I knew in my heart that a person lived there. He was Jesus Christ. And while I tried to abandon him, he did not abandon me. That means that God will not deny himself. He couldn't deny himself because I couldn't, even though I tried. So I went through the course of secretly, privately, holding to atheism. But I couldn't because there was a God and because his Son lived within me. Now for the unsaved, that's not true, but it was true for the believer, but that the Son is available. So I went through atheism. Then I went through I held for a period of time, to the long ages with naturalistic evolution, secretly, privately, saying, well, it's true. Then I found that there was evidence that it was not true. The further I went in private and public studies, it was all propped up by a philosophic concept. There was no evidence supporting it. So I had to go from there to, well, maybe the long ages are true. So I went to the gap or extended day age. I went through that period. But ultimately, the semantics of Scripture, the Hebrew usage, does not justify that. So I finally came to Glen Rose. I was completing the master's in archaeology. I had referred to the possibility that there were human footprints among dinosaur footprints. So my mentor, Dr. Clifford Wilson, said, if you're going to refer to that, I'm assigning you an actual excavation. You'll need to go to Glen Rose and perform an actual excavation. Well, this is not archaeology. This is paleoanthropology and it's paleontology. But I had to learn and perform the procedure for an enterprise such as that. So I got volunteers and did. At that point, I still personally held to the long ages. I accommodated the dinosaurs in the Mesozoic era of the past. And I felt that there was some substantiation to the geologic column from what is now called progressive creation, from the introduction of basic life forms, later reintroduction of more complicated life forms, but all life forms are incredibly complicated. So I was not justified in that, but that's what many people do. I held to long ages and put the dinosaurs back in the Mesozoic era, 228 million to 64 million years ago, and I felt justified. That's the position I held. And then I came to Glen, performed the excavation. And to my absolute amazement, after excavating 19 dinosaur footprints, continuing the original excavation of removing the overburden and delicately excavating through the clay marl, I was following that trail of dinosaur footprints. I was ready to stop the excavations. And one of the assistants said, "You just show us what to do, we'll do the work. Let's take one more slab." Okay. Removed another slab. At the end of that slab, as I excavated through the clay, there was not only a dinosaur footprint, but 17.5 inches from the dinosaur footprint, delicately excavating with wooden implements, there was a 16-inch human footprint. Now that blew my mind, because my paradigm didn't accept that. Even as a Christian, I had compromised and had accommodated the long geologic ages. That blew my mind. So I continued the excavations. That was a left, we got a right, another left, and another right. I called the press. They flew down by helicopter, put it front page, Fort Worth Star Telegram, track step on evolution. I didn't sleep for 4 days and nights because it blew everything I had adopted. So I then had to continue the excavations to find more evidence to substantiate and verify what I found. And I did continue the excavations. More footprints were found. To date, we've excavated over 90 human footprints among over 600 dinosaur footprints, all in original excavation procedure. So I then had to go back to embracing the absolute truth of man and dinosaur living contemporaneously. And Dr. Ernst Mayr debating Dr. Dwayne Gish, a marvelous friend of mine who is a tremendous creation scholar. Dr. Ernst Mayr, leading biologist at Harvard, the modern school of evolutionary compromise, admitted in the debate, if your friends along the Paluxy, Dr. Gish, can actually prove that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, that'll blow the entire theory of evolution. We'll have to start all over again with some other scenario. And that's true. But there are only two scenarios possible. Only two. Either the universe arrived and we arrived in the universe as living systems by a naturalistic process, or the universe arrived and we arrived in this universe by supernatural design and creation. No one can introduce an alternative. Only these two. Well, since the biblical record had been correct all along, I have spent the last 30 years building the museum, and only the Creator himself has been able to provide the funding on the shoestring where we operate for this very fine museum. We began in a log cabin and a tin shed. We now have a very fine museum. We have priceless artifacts that are under full 24-hour security surveillance in numerous dimensions. So I began searching and raising the funds independently for independent artifacts, such as the hammer, the London artifact found near London, Texas, an iron hammer whose constituency we cannot duplicate precisely. They were more intelligent than we. Found encased, concretionally encased, in what originally was termed Ordovician, supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old, later was termed by the geologic community in a small area that was early Cretaceous, assigned an age of 140 million years. I want to emphasize those ages are not there. They're simply assigned. So we got the London artifact. That was a miraculous acquisition. And then over the years, one artifact after another. And then we got the Burdick print. But we had to actually cut the Burdick print with a lapidary saw in order to see if the laminations were there, the compression densities were there. Well, they were, but we had to cut it. And in so doing, to some degree, it was compromised. And then one day, it dawned on me, and I'm sure the Creator nudged, it dawned on me. There's modern technology, and you have laboratory friends who've invited you to bring the artifacts there. There's modern technology, tomographic technology, to read through rock. Now there's spiral CAT scan technology where you can not only read through it, but you can segment it and interpret it. So, working with two independent certified laboratories, I began to take the artifacts, particularly the footprints, and they gladly, at their expense, CAT scanned these and gave us the full results. And every single expert technician said on the spot, there's compression density under these tracks. There's compression density at various points beside these tracks, but only in a limited area, showing the actual compression and the motion of the footprint, both of dinosaur footprints and human footprints. So now we did not have to compromise what we had found and what we had in our possession. We could determine what was genuine, what was not genuine. And all of these artifacts that we have in the museum have been demonstrated in two different laboratories to be absolutely genuine. But that introduces a problem. In the 1930s, Ernest Talbert Bull Adams, an incredible genius who lived in this area, completed Oxford in 3 years. Ernest Talbert Bull Adams was a brilliant man. His brother, George Adams, was quite intelligent as well, but he was not educated like his brother. Some human footprints had been found along dinosaur footprints. The first dinosaur footprints were discovered by Ernest Talbert Bull Adams, but it was Charlie Moss who discovered the first human footprints when he came back from the war, was recuperating in his hometown. First human footprints among dinosaur footprints after a spring flood had ripped up the ledge. Well, Bull Adams examined them, and Bull Adams, the scholar, Oxford scholar, who grew up here as well, thought that actually, since he was an anthropologist, he felt that the earliest evidence of man was at Glen Rose. So he gave this a technical primitive name. And actually, while this has been verified by Dr. Aaron Judkins and others, that there is this phenomenon of human footprints in rock, sedimentary rock worldwide, while that's been verified, at that point, this was the only evidence. So it was the first evidence of earliest man. But at that point, Ernest Talbert Adams had not divested himself of the long evolutionary time scale. I'm not sure he ever did. Many born-again scholars never divest themselves of that concept. So here's the problem. It was Depression time. And some of the old-timers went to the bed of the river, and after days of laborious activity, sometime the wife holding the chisel while the husband swung the sledge, they cut out dinosaur tracks, banded them, showed them alongside the road, and sold them to passersby for $200. That was a lot of money in the Depression. So George Adams cut out one or two human footprints and sold them. Then he realized he was a stonemason, and he was quite good. So he started carving 5 or 6 dinosaur footprints and 2 or 3 human footprints. He was quite good at it. So good that the Smithsonian learned that he had some human footprints, and they sent a representative down. Well, he thought they would somehow learn that he had carved them. They were stylized a bit, but they were stylized after some of the genuine tracks. And so he only had one left, and he hid it. He buried it. And it was carved. After long decades of time, the old home place, the George Adams home place, sold. The family gave a friend of mine the right to check for artifacts on the property. He dug up that track, brought it to me. The original that was carved. Decades of osmosizing flow of moisture had dissolved some of the surface so that I was able to determine how he carved them. He used a cold chisel with a flat head. So you wouldn't cut pockmarks in the rock. He actually abrased it. He was a good stonemason, so that it was smooth, but it was still fractured under the area where the cold chisel vibrated. So there were then pockmarks that were not in the original. I took the original to 2 separate certified laboratories. There were no compression density lines whatsoever under that carved print. And that's exactly what I expected and what the technicians expected. It was demonstrated as being carved. In contradistinction to our genuine footprints, some that we've excavated, some we've acquired, like the O.W. Willett print, like the Delt print. We know precisely where the Delt print came from. We know precisely where the Willett print came from. The hole is still there. On the park ledge, it was taken out before it was against the law to do so. Everything we want to be proper and right. So, here we have the opportunity to demonstrate what is genuine and what is not. Now, the evolutionary community, every time we get a new artifact and it's publicized, they say, oh, well, everybody knows those tracks along the Paluxy were carved, those human footprints were carved, and they hang up the phone. They don't give you an opportunity to explain. Some were carved. No question about it. But some were not carved, and we can demonstrate what has been carved and what has not been fabricated. We can demonstrate what is absolutely genuine, and that we've done. Now,
do you know how many were carved? And also,
yes. George Adams' son-in-law came to talk to me when I first came here. He helped George carve some of those. And he said that George and he carved. George started carving, and then the son-in-law got in. He helped him. They carved 5 or 6, no more, dinosaur tracks, and either 2 or 3 human tracks. That's all, no more. So that brings up the controversy of the Taylor Trail. The Taylor Trail was demonstrated to be, it was excavated by Stan Taylor. It was originally discovered by the late J.C. McFall. And the Taylor Trail was extended by Stan Taylor. They brought in equipment. They used hand operation as well. And they did find a series of human footprints. So creationists used that. Films were made. They were shown hundreds and hundreds of times across the country, on campuses, in churches, in private groups, with tremendous response. But then, an individual came down after the water was low and found that as he examined the Taylor Trail, there were some tridactyl reptilian claw stains in the Taylor Trail. So that made worldwide news. Wait a minute. Those are not human footprints after all in the Taylor Trail, in the bed of the Paluxy River. Those footprints were made by dinosaurs because the claw stains are there. Case closed. Not really. Don Patton and I then, over a period of years, watched, observed, cleaned under various conditions: summer, winter, spring, fall, high water, low water. We found that when the water was only 2 or 3 inches deep and relatively clear, the ultraviolet radiation brought out the stains. But when the water was a few inches deep, the ultraviolet radiation couldn't penetrate and the stains weren't there. The stains were genuine. A dinosaur had stepped there. So it is a trail of dinosaur footprints. But that's not all. Within that trail of dinosaur footprints, and by the way, that trail is the longest, the 3rd longest contiguous dinosaur trackway in the continental United States. In that trail are 14 human footprints, sometimes stepping in the middle of the dinosaur track where the claw stains were found, sometimes stepping slightly to the side, moving around in that track, and sometimes, like in +6, stepping to the side of the dinosaur track. So it is a trail of dinosaur footprints, but it's, in 14 of them, it was intersected and paralleled by a human being with an 11.5-inch human footprint. One of the pristine tracks that Don Patton and I discovered originally was the -3B, essentially perfect in every detail, and it moved around in that track. So the Taylor Trail was compromised in that originally it was thought to be only a trail of dinosaur footprints. It was found to be a trail of dinosaur footprints, but it is also a trail of human footprints within those dinosaur footprints. Now, we have subsequently followed up on the study. The Taylor Trail is important, but the property was bought by the state park, state agency. So we cannot sandbag it to observe it any longer. We can only observe what any casual individual might observe going up and down the river. But we have enough original, tangible, artifactual information here at the museum. We don't need the Taylor Trail. It's there. It is a trail of human footprints paralleling dinosaur footprints. We have, it's been stated that at the Creation Evidence Museum, we have more out-of-place artifacts that destroy evolutionary theory than probably all other entities combined that are known. So we have erected a wall. We call it the Wall of Truth. This we have gone to great expense to purchase from a great distance the primary actual rock of the geologic column. We've gone from the granite through Precambrian, Cambrian, Carboniferous, Permian, all the way up to the top. And we have brought in at great expense the actual rock. We put it in the layers. It's a 20-foot wall. We've modeled it after the work of Professor M.E. Clark, University of Illinois. The late Professor Clark was a world-class fluid dynamicist. And as a fluid dynamicist, he gave adequate explanation as to how all of these sedimentary deposits could be formed during the worldwide flood. We have artifacts starting with the Meister print in the Cambrian. We have the actual Meister print. It is a human sandal print with an Elrathia gingai trilobite pressed into the heel and one into the toe. It has stitching around the side, wear on the outside of the heel, totally consistent with forward locomotion. It is in the Cambrian, assigned evolutionarily an age of 550 million years. That's a problem. Dr. Ernst Mayr stated if you found human footprints in the Cretaceous, that would eliminate 20% of the geologic column, and it would, and that would destroy the theory of evolution. But he said if you found mammalian evidence way down in the Carboniferous or the Cambrian, that would blow everything, and that's exactly what we have. So in this column, we have a replica of the Meister print. We go up from there to the cup in coal, found in coal that is assigned mid-Pennsylvanian, assign an age, 395 million years. Then the coffee print in the Permian that's assigned an age of 230 million years. And then we go on up to these footprints in the Cretaceous that we've been discussing. So actually this wall of truth demonstrates, in contradistinction to the evolutionary assumption, that lower life forms in the geologic column demonstrate a gradual progression of development of life forms and ultimately the arrival of man. This wall of truth we have with the actual rock of the geologic column, supported by the actual artifacts on display, this column demonstrates that it was not 550 million years of evolutionary development, but instead was the evidence of the worldwide flood of Noah's day. So that brings us to ask, what are the implications? We talked about there are only two possibilities. Either we arrived by a naturalistic evolutionary progression, or we arrived by special creation. This evidence, with the compression density under and moving around to the side of these footprints, demonstrates that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, demonstrates that man and trilobites lived contemporaneously, removing the entire evolutionary progression of the supposed geologic column, bringing us to face-to-face confrontation with creation and the Creator. In every major university around the world, in the philosophy department, the four great questions of life are taught, or they're asked. They're never answered. Those four great questions are, who am I? Where did I come from? What's my purpose here? And where am I going? And they explore the questions, never coming up with a final answer. If we arrived by evolutionary development, who am I? I'm nothing. I'm just a complicated bug. Where did I come from? I came from a rock originally, dissolving its chemistry, and somehow by radiation of the sun, developing a living cell. That's absolutely impossible. But if evolution is true, who am I? I'm nobody. I'm just a complicated bug. Where did I come from? I came from a rock. What's my purpose here? One leading evolutionary professor said, I have a noble purpose in life. When I die, the chemistry of my body will dissolve, be reintroduced into the soil. I'll provide the fertilizer for the flowers and weeds of the future. That's my noble purpose. Oh, that's nihility. That's worse than nothing. Who am I if evolution's true? Nobody. Where did I come from? Came from a rock. What's my purpose? I'm fertilizer for the future. Where am I going? Nowhere. If evolution's true, this is it. But some creationists hold to evolution and say, well, this is how God did it. If God did it that way, but said he did it otherwise, you can't trust him. You're not going anywhere. If evolution is true. And leading evolutionists have admitted, laughingly, some of you Christians hold to evolution and you think you're being academic. They're incompatible. It's one way or the other, and they laugh and admit it. So, the other alternative. What if creation is true? And we have evidence that it is. Using the guidelines of leading evolutionists themselves, we have evidence in the geologic column. If creation is true, who am I? I am an individual originally made in the image of God. Even though I'm really scarred and I've not lived up to that image as I should have, originally I was made in the image of God. if creation is true. Who am I? That's who I am. Where did I come from? I came from his direct hand of special creation through Adam and Eve. What's my purpose here? My purpose is, first of all, to know him, privileged to know him, and then to represent him, to be his ambassador, to speak for him. Who am I? I'm an individual made in the image of God. Where did I come from? I came from his special hand of design and creation. What's my purpose? To know him and to represent him. And the fourth question, where am I going after this is over? I'm going home to be with him for all eternity. For God inhabits eternity. I'm pleased that God has permitted me as an individual to, over this long period of decades, research, discover, embrace, and now display for others to see and know evidence that creation is true.
Just a couple of questions. When did Charlie Moss first discover human footprints? Do you know that? Or?
Yes. 1920, either 1918 or 1928. I believe it was 1928. We have the original document in safety deposit.
And do you mind if I use your history and some of your stuff out of your book in DVD?
That's fine.
Okay. Let's see. The 3B track, was that in the Taylor Trail?
Minus 3B is in the Taylor Trail.
But that wasn't uncovered by Stan, that was uncovered by you guys. You extended it even further.
Correct.
Is that right?
Well, you see, erosional factors are at play. Weatherizing the flow of the river. And when the river gets dry, carbonic acid actually eats into the rock. So when the Taylor Trail was first cataloged by Stan Taylor, they didn't see that track. It was slightly over to the side. So it was not cataloged. But when Don Patton and I pumped the river dry, which is a pretty difficult task to perform, we actually pumped it into the farmers' fields, and they were glad. When we pumped the river dry, there was another track there. And in that track, in that dinosaur track, slightly off center was this beautiful human footprint, minus 3B. I think it was Wilbur Fields. Yes, Wilbur Fields originally saw that there was a depression, dinosaur depression over there, but he did not know that there was a human track in it. Don Patton and I discovered the human track.
Okay. When was the Burdick print found, and can you just elaborate on how to come into your possession?
Yes. Clifford Burdick, geologist, actually bought two prints way back in probably the 1950s in Arizona. He sent one to an Adventist college in the east. They sectioned it, and the laminations were not all that clear. He kept the other. I was able to get the other from him in the 1980s. It was part of his treasure. I was able to get it from him, to purchase it from him. And then later, we had it sectioned, and the laminations were clearer in this one. You see, what most people don't realize, in this muddy flat during the flood of Noah's day, every few hours there would be introduction of new material. Some of this material would lithify very quickly. If you stepped in it, if it cured, if you were in the process of the curing, and you stepped in it as a human being, or a dinosaur stepped in it, you would not only make a depression, you would make compression under it. You would generate compression. But 45 minutes later, or an hour later, 2 hours later, depending on the amount of calcium carbonate in it, you may make a depression, but you may not make compression lines under it. We've actually excavated dinosaur footprints on private property, have sectioned them, and found no lamination under them. But a few feet away, sectioning the next dinosaur footprint, we found lamination under it. It just depends on how soggy it might be. And so that, to my mind, explains how one of the verdict prints could have lamination, compression, lines visible, and the other would not.
Let's see.
The verdict print was a human footprint, by the way.
Yeah, and that came from Paluxy.
It came from the Paluxy. It came from the area on 67 where the bridge crosses 67. And it was excavated there.
Okay.
As they were building the bridge, cutting for the bridge.
Okay. Let's see. There's an experience I saw in a Hovind video about a pastor, David Smith, and he was there when Nova was here, and Nova ignored you and the human footprint. Can you tell us about that event?
Well, Nova came down by arrangement. They were planning to release a video, a documentary of the human and dinosaur footprints and the controversy. They also asked an individual, he's not a paleontologist, but he did a lot of research speaking for the evolutionary community. They asked that individual to come as well to represent the other side. And Nova did give me opportunity to go into the Taylor Trail, and at that point, we knew there were human footprints, but we also knew there were dinosaur footprints. And they did give opportunity for us to film through the glass, through an aquarium glass, and for me to show that there were human footprints. And then, of course, dinosaur footprints in the same trail. They also filmed, they were here for a number of days, they filmed my excavation of a lepidodendron that was polystrate. And they saw and documented that our procedure was a professional procedure. And they had assured me that they were going to cover both sides adequately. And then they employed Walter Cronkite, who was an avid evolutionist, to narrate the documentary. And he refused to even mention the possibility that there were human footprints. So the program did air, and it did not give the equal coverage, but the fact that there was even mention that there was creation research going on and mention of the possibility that we were searching for human footprints. Publicity is not, even bad publicity is not all that bad as long as they spell your name right. The biblical and creation position is prove all things, hold fast to that which is good. My position originally, as you know, was that there could be no human footprints among dinosaur footprints. But that has changed completely because of the evidence, not because of what I wanted to believe or what my grandmother believed, but because of the evidence. Every single artifact has been weighed and analyzed over a long period of years from every direction before it has been embraced. And now we have impeccable evidence, incontrovertible evidence, that there are human footprints among the dinosaur footprints with a compression density demonstrating that. And we should, as Christians and creationists, not respond and adopt every wind and every idea and every doctrine and every position. We should reflect upon and analyze the actual evidence. Try all things. That's what we've tried to do. We should be objective. In fact, we should begin assuming it's not true. And we should let the evidence convince us that it is true. Once we know it is true, we should hold fast to that. And that's what we do. I name this the Creation Evidence Museum because we do have actual evidence.
Okay, maybe we should cover a little bit of history. Can you tell us a little bit about Roland T. Byrd and putting Glen Rose on the map and then transition to Clifford Burdick? I don't know a lot about him, and also didn't he form the first creationist organization, the Deluge Society or something like that? Or
I'm not sure. I don't think he formed it. I think he was a member of it.
Okay. Anyway, just if you could talk about those two.
Roland T. Byrd actually etched his name in paleontological history by coming to Glen Rose and directing the excavation of a series of dinosaur footprints in the Paluxy Basin near the area that is now the state park. When he first came, we assume that scholars know everything. They don't. We assume that credentialed individuals know how to work in the field. They don't necessarily do so. It took the old-timers to show him how not to tear those tracks up. They had learned, since during the Depression, during the 30s, he heard about the tracks. They're the ones who discovered them. He made them famous. And of course, National Geographic and others really got a lot of billing out of it. When he came, he did what would be standard. They said, no, you'll ruin the track. For those tracks that were to be cut out, and they were sent to American Museum of Natural History and other museums, and still there, they said, you have to band them. You have to take steel bands, and you have to rip them because they're fractured and they'll fall apart, and he found that to be the case. And he followed, but the huge slabs they didn't have to band, but the smaller ones they did. So they taught him, and so he etched his name in paleontological history with that excavation, became very famous, got his doctorate as a result of that. He did not have a doctorate when he first came. Then Clifford Burdick got involved, and he was a credentialed geologist. The fact that he let it be known that he was a creationist caused him not to get his degree earlier, even though he had fully qualified for it. He was a good man. I knew him personally and highly respected him. And he, of course, came much later than Roland T. Byrd. He got involved in the 50s. Roland T. Byrd got involved in the 30s. The McFall family has been very close to us in this research. I remember a large number of paleontologists and anthropologists arriving at the McFall property. And the press arrived. Emmett McFall was a very smart man, even though he was not educated. And the press was interviewing me, and they turned to him saying, "What do you have to say?" And Emmett McFall said, "These are man tracks." He didn't call them human tracks. He said, colloquially, he said, "These are man tracks, and those scientists don't know nothing." Well, many scientists do know a lot, but when it came to that, they didn't. Later, a group of about 18 paleontologists and anthropologists arrived from University of Texas by special bus to examine these tracks. And the son, the late son, J.C. McFall, was with me, and the press was there, and we were talking back and forth. And J.C. McFall walked up and said to the leader of the evolutionary group, he said, "So you believe we're about half monkey?" And the fellow didn't know what to say. So J.C. just walked off. They both made their point. Were it not for the permission and participation of the McFall family, I would probably never have been able to settle here and carry out this research. They have been allies in this work and have always been eager for us simply to find the truth. Now, Emmett McFall took
He's picking up an helicopter.
family. It would not have been possible for me to continue the research or to even settle in Glen Rose anticipating the research. I knew somebody had to settle the question. And you can't just come in overnight, find the evidence, leave, and publish. You have to make friends, you have to live, you have to be a part of the community. And the McFall family has participated in every dimension, beginning with Emmett McFall, the grandfather. Once he was gone, carried on, and the permission and encouragement from J.C., his son. Once he was gone, the permission and encouragement from his son, R.C. Carlisle McFall. In fact, originally I intended to produce a documentary, and the title was going to be High Noon at the McFall Ledge, because it was the McFall family, J.C. McFall, who actually discovered the Taylor Trail, took them down to see it. So they were involved to begin with and have made a clear statement that there were human tracks among dinosaur footprints. Emmett McFall was my friend, and J.C. was my friend, and R.C. is my friend. Without their encouragement, participation, this would not have been possible.
Excellent. Okay. Oh boy, I think that should do it. Let me look through real quick here.
You won't be able to use 2% of that.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Could you run by me again real quick how you think the flood was going on and how people were walking or running not running, but in a hurry, and how just over all the years, the linemen, the footprints, and why they would walk in them, and
Okay.
just what was happening during the flood.
All right. In the state of Texas, we have a unique geologic road map. That is, we have batholiths, that is, uprises of granite. Enchanted Rock State Park is the best known. It is a batholith that has been washed and reworked on the surface, but below it, the original granite. The granite's very hard to move. And out from that Enchanted Rock State Park batholith, uprise of granite, there are 3 arches. One extends to Oklahoma, one extends down in southern Texas, one extends toward Glen Rose and terminates about 16 miles or dips about 16 miles from this location. When you examine the dinosaur footprints in the state of Texas, it's amazing that those footprints have been found around the plateaus of those 3 arches, those granite arches. So we could readily envision, and this was first introduced by Dr. John Morris, I don't know what his current scenario is, but to me it makes sense. We can readily envision how the waters of the flood were ascending and how there would have been a refuge on the Llano uplift of granite and on each of these arches. And every 12 hours, you have a new sedimentary layer being introduced because of the gravitational effect of the moon. This scenario was introduced by Professor Emmy Clark, University of Illinois, and Dr. Henry Voss at University of Illinois. So as the waters are rising, there's a refuge area where they can retreat. They can anticipate 12 hours later. It's 12 hours because of the fact that it affects both sides of the globe, not 24 hours, 12 hours, the gravitational effect of the moon. So they were able to temporarily have refuge, forage for food, return to the temporary area. Then ultimately the waters covered all of that. We know it because the granite is reworked there at the Enchanted Rock State Park batholith rise of granite. And ultimately they saw their demise. as they were walking in these flats, these were agile individuals. We know from the profile of their feet, some of the footprints that we've excavated show the sensitive second toe. The second toe is the most sensitive of all the toes of the human podiatry. It feeds more information neurologically to the brain than any other toe. So against resistance, such as walking in mud, while the great toe is dominant, if you're walking in mud, that sensitive second toe has a tendency to dip like that. And that's what we found in a number of these tracks. So these were very sensitive, agile individuals. I actually named them Humanus Bauanthropus, after the Fijians, who are incredibly reflective in the South Pacific, from the island of Baugh, the royal island, in no way related to my name at all, but Baugh Island is the royal island of Fiji. So these individuals were agile. Being agile and mobile, and in somewhat desperate context, they hardly milled around. When they moved, they had a longer stride and pace. Often, they would show intent of pushing back. They were going somewhere. They weren't just ambling around. Pushing back, as Aaron Judkins indicated, within the track, therefore you get variations within a human footprint. But they were very agile. They knew they had a short time for refuge. What these waters were was alarming, and I certainly can envision them walking in these flats under those conditions.